It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
She says, and I quote, "There were many unpopular parenting rules I followed as a young mother, but my number one was don't do anything for your kids that they can do for themselves." Now, I chafe a little bit at that.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Is it beginning to feel a lot like Christmas?
It's been feeling like Christmas for weeks because of your Christmas extra-ness. So in the Happy Families house...
I'm not over the top, though.
Our last house was a lot bigger than the house we're in now. In moving to the beach, we lost more than 50% of our house. Like we moved from a house that was pretty big in Brisbane to a house that's less than half of what we used to have. But because we had such a big house in Brisbane, you bought a second Christmas tree. You had a Christmas tree in the family room and a Christmas tree in the lounge room. And even then, it still didn't really feel like Christmas. There were just these...
No, it was these tiny little pockets.
that were nice and green and decorated. But now, the same amount of decorations has completely overwhelmed our tiny little beach shack.
Don't say that.
It's greenery and Christmas lights, and it's everywhere. It's feeling like Christmas. And our kids have been allowing us for the last couple of weeks to get some Christmas carols happening. You know my favourite Christmas carol? I love listening to this one, is in terms of modern Christmas carols, there's a song called God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen, and a group that used to be around back in the late 1990s when I was on the radio, a group called the Bare Naked Ladies. They're a Canadian group, and they've joined up with Sarah McLachlan, and they've done God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. It's my favourite. I have it on repeat. You've noticed. I'm singing it all the time. The kids know this song now because it's my favourite Christmas song. And that and Carol the Bells.
God rest ye merry gentlemen, let nothing you dismay.
So yes, it's beginning to feel a lot like Christmas.
Well, I'm also a bit excited because we actually booked in our very first Christmas street party.
Christmas street party. It sounded like you said Christmas strip party to me. I just wanted to be clear that you said Christmas street party.
It was a street party.
Okay.
And you came up with a brilliant idea to actually do it on the 23rd of December. I thought you were crazy.
Yeah.
We've literally had one.
The whole neighbourhood has said, we're in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on Friday the 23rd, it's a street party in our street for our street neighbours, just letting you know. But what we're trying to do in our family and in our community, in our street, is build a sense of belonging, a sense of mattering, a sense that we notice you when you're here and we notice when you're not here and we miss you. So we've had a big Halloween. We also did a big neighbourhood breakfast and we had like 50 neighbours in our yard. And now the Christmas party is going to be in our yard as well. And I'm super excited for that. It's like a couple of weeks away. And I'm really, really excited that we're creating these relationships. The neighbourhood feels so good when we invite people to be a part of our lives. And I think when I look at the conversations, the emails that come through to podcasts at happyfamilies.com.au, the questions that people ask, so often people are saying, I feel isolated, I feel like I'm doing it on my own. It's hard. This is hard. It's hard for us to do Halloween because we don't really care about it at all. It's hard to wake up on a Saturday morning and have 50 neighbours show up at 7:30. It's actually really hard to put on a Christmas party for the neighbourhood. And yes, it's potluck and people are bringing stuff and so on, but we've still got to do the organisation. We've still got to facilitate it and we've got to do the clean-up that night or the next morning.
Well, and the reality is when we had everyone over for the breakfast, they all talked about the fact that they'd love to do a Christmas party, but nobody wanted to take it on.
Yeah.
So there is this...
There's an appetite.
And there's an acknowledgement that they want these things.
Yeah.
But so often we sit back and wait for somebody else to do it, and yet our lives are lacking as a result. So, yeah, this is just something that we're going to do, and I'm really excited about it. And, the reality is I could actually take it all on and just do it all, but I've decided that I'm not going to do that because you actually build community as you work together.
Yeah, as you serve each other.
Yeah. So I've got a handful of women who've all, asked if they can be helpful, and I'm going to take them up on it.
Too right. Can't wait. The podcast episode that we're going to dive into today is not actually about Christmas parties, but you started it by asking if it was feeling Christmassy, and we've gone on like a 3-minute tangent, Mrs. Coulson. So,
well, it is almost December, and everyone then can technically be excited about Christmas.
Okay, fair call. I want to dive into an article that I found online. This is at the cnbc.com website, and the article is written by somebody called Esther Wojcicki. So I haven't heard of Esther Wojcicki before, but she has a pretty tidy byline. She's done some pretty cool stuff. Esther Wojcicki is an educator, journalist, and best-selling author of How to Raise Successful People. She's also the co-founder of Tract.app and the chief parenting officer at Sesh. So you can find her on socials, and we'll link to this article from CNBC. But I want to sort of pull a few things apart here and talk about them, because the principles she's talking about are so valuable for any parent who wants their kids to do well in life. And I'm pretty sure that's like 99.99% of parents that say, yes, I want my kids to do well in life.
Because of the name of the article, you're a little bit up in arms and you thought we were going to be having a pretty big debate.
But then I read the article and I thought, oh, it's not so bad.
Her article's called, I Raised 2 Successful CEOs and a Doctor. Here's the unpopular parenting rule I always used on my kids.
So I read that title and I'm like, what makes people think that we're aspiring to raise CEOs and doctors? Like, I want my kids to grow up to be who they want to be, who they're meant to be. I want them to follow their energy, to experiment and have range and breadth before they get depth. I'm not interested in raising CEOs and doctors unless they're interested in being CEOs and doctors, and then I want to facilitate their pathways. So I got kind of cranky about the title.
You kind of did.
I did. But then I started to read and I thought, oh, there's some stuff here that's worth talking about. Just to highlight, this is what she says, and I quote.
Well, what's her number one rule?
She says, and I quote, there were many unpopular parenting rules I followed as a young mother. But my number one was, don't do anything for your kids that they can do for themselves. Now, I chafe a little bit at that because our children are capable of doing all kinds of things at the right time when things are working out. Like, they're capable of cleaning their room, but if the room is way too messy, or if it's late at night and they're tired, or if they're hungry, or, I mean, we can come up with all sorts of reasons. Sometimes they actually can't, even though most of the time they can. And I just want to acknowledge that there's a little bit of grey in this rule. It's not a hard and fast.
Well, and I think that's the hard thing when you're reading the written word. You're not actually having a conversation, so you don't have all the context. You don't know, but, you know, based on what's on paper, it could feel like you're taking a really hard line.
Yeah,
you can do that. I'm not doing that. It's not my job.
Tie up your shoes because we need to get in the car. We're going to be late for school. But if you've got a child who's overwhelmed, just had a really big anxiety-riven morning, maybe they can most of the time, but this morning they actually can't. Well,
I've got children who are all capable of making their school lunch.
We have children. I just want to put that out there.
You play a small part.
Oh, right.
But the reality is there are some days that if I do not get in the kitchen and get those lunches made, we don't get to school on time.
Yeah.
So I think we just need to put that into context.
Yeah. Okay, great. So what she says then is that worked out for my daughters. All 3 grew up to be highly successful. Susan is the CEO of YouTube. Janet is a doctor, and Anne is the co-founder and CEO of 23andMe. So she's done all right with those kids. That is pretty. She's got some bragging rights. The next part I thought, not so exciting, but I'm going to read it anyway. She says, parents need to stop coddling their kids. The more you trust your child to do things on their own, the more empowered they'll be. Totally on board with that. And I love the word trust. Got to trust that our kids are going to develop if we give them the space and stop coddling them, stop trying to do it all for them, stop trying to smooth the path for them. Let them navigate the rocky path and trust that they can. But then she talks about this with some simple ideas. Waking up, have them set their own alarm, getting dressed, let them pick their own outfit, breakfast, lunch and dinner. Give them simple tasks like stirring the pancake batter, cleaning their lunchbox and setting the table. Getting their backpack ready, have them run through a list of what they need to bring that day. Making plans, let them come up with weekend or after school activities, checking homework. Well, you know how I feel about homework. And then she says chores are really important. You got to make sure the kids are doing their chores. And she talks about how to do that. So it was fine. There's nothing offensive about that. It was just fine. But the thing that really caught me was the section about perfection. And this is what I love. Because when we get caught up in the quality of our kids' efforts, then they start to get caught up in that as well, and they don't tend to do as well. So let me read this. She said, I expected my daughters to make their own beds every morning. A bed made by a kid can look like she's still asleep in it. But I didn't fight them. As long as they did it, I was happy.
So I'm not going to lie. this is not a strong point of mine at all.
You don't like this bit at all.
No.
But for years and years, I've always said to the kids, just make the bed. I don't care how you make it. Just make it. We'll come back and fix it later if we need to, but we just want you to make it. We want you to learn the skill of making it. And this is what Esther adds to this idea. She says mastery means doing something as many times as it takes to get it right. Being a writing teacher taught me this. In the 80s and 90s, one of the supposed characteristics of a good teacher was that your class was so hard that many students failed. And I remember those days. In fact, being a university lecturer, I remember there was an expectation that there was going to be a rating on a bell curve and grading on a bell curve, and there was supposed to be kids that were failing. And I always had a problem with that. And here's what she says. The kids who got a D on their first paper found it impossible to recover, and they lost the motivation to improve since they were starting out so far behind. So I gave them the opportunity to revise their work as many times as they wanted. Their grade was based on the final product. And when it came time for testing, my students performed in the 90th percentile on state exams.
So you've shared a story about another teacher who did something similar.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that idea. The reality is in the real world, there are not many teachers who do that.
No, but I mean, this is a bigger conversation about the education system. But are you there to teach so that kids can get a grade, or are you there to teach so that kids can understand the material?
Oh, totally. I love it, because the reality is, even in the conversations that you've shared about your days at university as a lecturer and a tutor, even though your help was on offer, no one took it up.
Yeah. Yeah, because I was so worried about the grade, and I kept on saying, no. If I work with you, if you come to me, I'll read as many drafts, I'll give you as much feedback, because I want everyone to get a high distinction. But they didn't want to take me up on it. It was, well, for any number of reasons. But what I love here is, and Michaeline Duclef, she talked about it in our last summit, the Happy Families Hot Mess Summit. She wrote about it in Hunt, Gather, Parent. And that is when parents simply invite their children into their space and ask them to participate with them in whatever they're doing, regardless of the quality of the work. The kids are there. They're feeling a sense of belonging. They're developing competence, but it happens slowly over time. And they're choosing to be there. They're not being forced to be there. It's like the story that I shared on the podcast a couple of months ago when I was out raking the leaves.
But I actually don't think it's about building. So building competence obviously is a byproduct of what you're doing, but what's actually happening is the relationship is being nurtured.
As the relationship's nurtured, the kids feel safe to make mistakes.
That's right.
And to do the learning.
Yeah.
And they actually choose to be there because the relationship feels safe. So we're meeting those basic psychological needs. So I just thought it was a really, really neat article, and I wanted to do a podcast episode about it and link to it in the show notes so people can read it. Just some quick, simple parenting inspiration. You don't have to be raising CEOs and doctors, but when you meet those needs, when you give kids the opportunity to develop and grow, to make those choices and to be in a safe relationship, what happens is they're more likely to choose to go places where they flourish. They're more likely to have the opportunities to flourish because they're developing that competence and having those experiences. That was the article, How to Raise Successful CEOs and Doctor, the unpopular parenting rule I always used on my kids. I'm curious, Kylie, to know whether or not you think we do that very much. Do we do things for our kids that they can do for themselves?
Probably me more than you. I have a bit of an agenda. I like things a certain way. And so you'll often find me
and there is
getting in there and doing it just so it's done.
And there's also that level of complication where when you've got a child who's refusing to, let's say, get dressed for school and pack their bag, they are capable of doing it. So do you force the issue, bearing in mind that high emotions equals low intelligence, and they're probably going to move further and further away from getting it done, or do you just work with them on it? And I'm inclined to not do it for them, but do it with them.
No, and that's probably a really good caveat there. More times than not, it's about working with them to achieve the outcome. Time restraints, any number of things would stop us from being able to kind of give them the autonomy that they need in that moment.
Yeah. So 6 words to help out here. I do it, we do it, you do it. And if you go through that process, you do it initially, then we do it together. And then when they can finally do it on their own, they do it. That's the method. That's the approach. So we'll link to it in the show notes. Like I said, I hope that you enjoyed that podcast. I thought it was worth the conversation. Tomorrow, a listener question about a child, an 8-year-old, who is constantly lying. We're going to deal with the lying matter in tomorrow's podcast. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Ruan from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. And if you'd like more information about making your family happier, please visit us at happyfamilies.com.au.